change their body. They try and lose weight. They go on a physical transformation journey. They'll do a challenge. They'll do a diet. They'll focus on the physical aspect of it, but life doesn't life doesn't become easier for you just because you're trying to lose weight.
Welcome back to another episode of the Peak Performance Life podcast. Today, I am super excited. We have someone who is a New York Times bestselling author. He's been on TV. He's been on shows like Dr. Oz, Good Morning America, The View, lots of other great, outlets in terms of news and media. He has a huge following of over 1 million people on social media, and that's because he has done something very, very, very unique. I'm going to tell you about that, and I'm going to have him share his story here as well in just a minute. Really quick, if you are a repeat listener, we would love if you could please rate, review the podcast. That helps us get found by more people. Share it with a friend if you feel it's valuable and you've learned something valuable, which I bet you will today, because this is a really, really awesome podcast. So yeah, really appreciate you sharing if you're a repeat listener. So we have with us today, Drew Manning. Now, Drew is known for his Fit2Fat2Fit.com experiment, which went viral online. Again, he's been featured on Dr. Oz, Good Morning America, The View. Now, this experiment is where Drew actually, to empathize, I'll let him explain a little bit more, but really what he did was to empathize more with his clients who were having trouble losing weight. He actually did an experiment. I think the first one was back in 2011, where he gained, I believe it was 75 pounds. Is that right?
Correct. Yep.
Gained 75 pounds on purpose, right?
Yep. On purpose.
Yep. 75 pounds on purpose, and then lost it in a year, all within the same year. And then I believe you did that again at the age of 40, just to kind of see if there was any differences. Yeah, so this is just a fascinating experiment. Someone who actually is willing to put his body and mind through an incredible process, an incredible experiment. Honestly, I don't have the balls to do that, or maybe actually that's true commitment to me, really, what Drew has done, the commitment to show his clients, look, this can be done, I can lose the weight, but also the learnings that you get from gaining weight and losing weight like that. So Drew, thank you so much for joining us. Real pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Talor. Thank you for having me on.
Awesome. So yeah, let's jump right into it. If you want to tell a little bit of a background, kind of how you got into it, and then I'd love to hear more details. Just kind of give a rough overview of your experiment, but it's so fascinating.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in a family of 11 brothers and sisters, and we all played sports. And so for me, growing up, I played football, American football, and wrestling were part of my life since I was a young kid. So being active, being physically fit, just kind of came naturally as a byproduct of playing sports and being active as a kid in a family of 11, and we all played sports. So for me, being in shape was all I knew. Like it was a part of my life from a very young age, and it came very easily for me because it was part of what I had to do to, be successful at these two sports that I excelled in as a kid. And so fast forward to 2009, here I was, personal trainer, your typical trainer, six pack, muscles, all that stuff. Never been overweight a day in my life. And then now as a trainer, I'm trying to help people who have been overweight pretty much almost all of their life. And there was an obvious disconnect between me, someone who has never been overweight, thinking it's fairly easy to lose weight, right? And my clients who struggle to lose weight. I couldn't understand why it was so hard for them, right? For me, it was so simple. You just eat healthy food, you go to the gym, you stay disciplined, and you stay consistent, and it's not that hard, right? That's the way I viewed it.
Mm-hmm.
And my clients would tell me, one of my clients who was my brother-in-law at the time told me, he's like, Drew, you don't understand how hard it is for me or for people like me, because for you, it's always been easy. But for me or for us, it's really, really hard. And I kind of took that to heart when he said that, because I was like, you're right. I don't understand why you're struggling. It seems so simple in my mind. You just put down the junk food, you go to the gym, like what's so hard about that, right? And then when he said that, I was thinking of ideas like, okay, maybe there's some truth to that. Maybe there's something I need to learn as the trainer to gain a better understanding. And then this idea of Fit2Fat2Fit kind of just popped up in my head one day, and this light bulb went off like, oh, what if you did this experiment online and had people follow you to see if it was, this is back before YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram were even, a big thing really. And so I had this idea to document my journey of gaining weight on purpose to hopefully gain a better understanding. And that's kind of where this idea of Fit to Fat to Fit came from. And the idea in a nutshell was for 6 months to stop exercising, right? So I couldn't exercise.
Wow.
And then also I wanted to focus on a standard American diet. We've all seen Super Size Me, which is Morgan Spurlock, who does McDonald's for 30 days straight and he almost dies. What I wanted to do was focus on everyday typical American foods that we grew up with in the 70s and 80s that were marketed to us as somewhat healthy foods, and focus on those types of foods. And ended up gaining 75 pounds in those 6 months, which was way harder than I thought it was going to be. It was a very, very humbling experience, which is why I think it caught on, which is why I think it went viral, because people saw how truly humbled I was. And I admitted how wrong I was by the end of it. I was so wrong about my approach to transformation, thinking it was easy, thinking it was, just a lack of willpower that people just, couldn't be disciplined. That couldn't be further from the truth. Like now, with where I'm at now and how I see transformation is completely different ever since that first experiment that I did back in 2011.
Wow. Wow. So 2011, you purposely gained 75 pounds within 6 months. And then within the next 6 months, you lost it all and got back to essentially where you were before.
Yeah. So 6 months of gaining weight, 6 months of losing weight. So it's a year-long process. And, during that process, like you mentioned, it went viral, was on a bunch of TV shows and got a book deal, created my own TV show out of it, which we had 2 seasons of the TV show called Fit to Fat to Fit. So it was a pretty crazy experiment that I did not expect to take off like it did. I thought it would just be kind of a fun social thing that people would, follow along, and, maybe a few friends and family would follow along with it, but it kind of struck a chord, So
Yeah. So let's kind of start with, and there's so many fascinating parts in terms of psychology and identity and beliefs that I want to get to a little bit later. But first, just kind of the smaller details. I'm curious. So how did you gain 75? Like, obviously you stopped working out. That's one thing. And then what are some of the foods that you incorporated that you weren't previously eating when you were fit, that you started eating that helped you gain 75 pounds?
Yeah. So, for most of your followers that maybe grew up here in America or in a first world country, there's so much highly processed foods that are available to us that are cheap and affordable. They're very convenient. And let's be honest, they taste freaking amazing. And so I focused a lot on sugary cereals, chips, cookies, crackers, granola bars, juices, smoothies, frozen foods like Hot Pockets and other stuff like Top Ramen and SpaghettiOs and all of these foods that we have here in abundance in America that are just, they are delicious. I'm not gonna lie. I love the taste of them, and they're super cheap and affordable and super convenient, right? You can live off that stuff, for quite a while. And so that's the kinds of foods. So things like Cinnamon Toast Crunch and, that was probably my favorite cereal. Lots of chips and cookies and crackers that you can imagine, Pringles, Doritos, white bread, white pasta, like I said, juices, granola bars, things like that. Those were, 90% of the foods that I ate during those 6 months. Probably I didn't really track it back in 2011, but probably around 5,000 to 6,000 calories per day is what I consumed during those 6 months.
Wow. So a lot of carbs, processed foods, sugars, things of that nature. And then, and I mentioned, and so you did this experiment in 2011, and then you did it again. Was it in 2020 or 21?
Yeah, 2020.
2020, when you were 40 years old, you did it again, right? So I'm curious also a little bit to know, so back in 2011, the first time, then what did you go back to in terms of losing weight? Was it as simple as just going back to the gym and then back? Because I have a feeling like in 2020, the keto diet and low carb was more in play, but back in 2011, that wasn't that popular. So I'm curious, were you doing more like the traditional calorie counting and doing things like that back then to lose the weight?
Yeah, a very good question. And thanks for bringing that up because people assume that I did keto just because I talk a lot about keto. But you're right. In 2011, keto was not mainstream, was not very well known in the fitness community. I kind of followed more of a paleo-ish approach. But my meals were spread out, 5, 6 meals a day. So your typical bodybuilder type of approach where it's smaller meals every 2 to 3 hours, high in protein, moderate amount of fat, moderate amount of carbs. And that's kind of what I focused on as far as nutrition goes. As far as exercise goes, what I back in those days, it was pretty similar to what I did in 2020, but it was a mixture of high intensity interval training type of cardio on 2 days a week, and then 3 days of resistance training that were more of a higher paced or faster paced lifting sessions. So supersets is kind of what I focused on Monday, Wednesdays, Fridays. And, believe it or not, people think that since I'm a personal trainer, I just work out, 5 hours a day. I was working out maybe 40 minutes per day, 5 days a week. I was a dad, or I'm a dad. I had a full-time job in the medical field at the time, coached Little League football on the side, did some personal training on the side. So it wasn't like I worked out 7 hours a day and, and to lose the weight. It was pretty sustainable, pretty doable approach to lose the weight. And then I'm sure we'll get into the details of what I did in 2020 that were a little bit different.
Got it. And then were your calories, when you were gaining weight, you did about 5,000 calories a day. When you were losing weight, were you counting calories? Did you get that down to 3,000 a day, or what was that like?
It was closer to 2,000 actually. And back in those days, I don't know if MyFitnessPal was around back then, but I didn't use it. I just kind of estimated and guesstimated how much I was consuming. And if I had to guess, it was probably around 2,000 calories per day spread out over 5 to 6 smaller meals per day. That was the approach that I used back then. Does it work? Yes, it absolutely works. There's a lot of different ways to lose weight, which I'm sure we can get into. There's a million ways to lose weight. Whatever way creates the most sustainable caloric deficit for you, weight loss is achievable for anyone as long as you can find what method of eating works best for you that you can stay consistent with. And that's kind of, my, I guess, philosophy nowadays is, yes, keto works. Yes, paleo works. Yes, all kinds of diets work if you stick with them consistently and they create a caloric deficit for you. I think that's important to point out as well. But of course, there's differences between all these diets, and there's advantages and disadvantages. And, some people gravitate towards one or other people gravitate towards another, and different things work for different people. And so I'm not trying to say that there's a one size fits all approach that works for everyone when it comes to weight loss. It's very bio-individual how people lose weight and how efficiently they lose weight, and how easy it is for them, not just physically, but like what you mentioned before, psychologically. There's a lot that goes into transformation that people don't notice, or they overlook the mental and emotional aspects of weight loss. And that's why so many people struggle with the transformation, is because they think of it as just a physical thing, but it's way more mental and emotional than people think. And that's kind of the biggest lesson I learned from that first experiment I did.
Interesting. Yeah. It's the more podcast interviews I do with people, the more I realize that it's not a one size fits all. So yeah, it's a great point. I've had weight loss people come on, talk about 5, 6 meals a day, every 2, 3 hours you got to eat. And I've had keto people and intermittent fasting and everything else, which is like the complete opposite. And those people do great with that as well. So yeah, great point. So then in 2020, then I believe, so then that's when you tried more of a keto approach, and yeah, what was that like?
Yeah, so let me first start off explaining why I did it a second time, because I swore to people I would never do it again after the first time because it was so humbling, it was so hard. So first of all, why did I do it again? 2020 was a year of chaos and division in this country, or this world in general. There's a lot of rioting going on. There was a lot of the pandemic, and caused a lot of division, and I felt like this world was lacking empathy. And if there's one thing I learned from my first experiment, it was the importance of having empathy for other people. And that's kind of the main message I got out of that first Fit2Fat2Fit experiment, was the importance of having empathy, which is listening to understand people, not listening to respond to them. And I think that we as humans are programmed to listen to respond, or listen to judge or critique or correct. And that's the world of social media that we live in. That's why there's so many keyboard warriors behind the their phones or their laptops, saying things that they probably would never say to someone's face. But it creates this world of division. And so I felt like this world was lacking empathy. And so I felt almost called to do it again a second time, as a 40-year-old, to give that age demographic a little bit of hope, a little bit of motivation to say, hey, yes, it can be harder as you get older, but it's still possible. And let's do this journey together. I'm going to do it with you. I'm going to gain the weight again as a 40-year-old, and we're going to lose this weight together. And that's kind of the power of doing it as a team, as a community, with people following along. And so doing it again a second time as a 40-year-old was, one, I wanted to bring more empathy, not just to the fitness industry, but hopefully carry over into the world in general. But then also giving that age demographic of 40+ year olds, like, hey, we know it's harder, but let's still do it. We can still do hard things. And then also back in 2011, like I mentioned before, social media wasn't what it is today. There was no live streaming, there was no Insta stories or TikToks, none of that existed. And so doing it a second time gave me an opportunity, a chance to show people, hey, this is really what I went through in 2011. You just didn't get to see the day-to-day changes in my mindset, my attitude, and my mood, and what I went through on a day-to-day basis. Because a couple times a week I would upload some YouTube videos, but you didn't really get to see, what's Drew eating today, how's he feeling today, what was his sleep score from his Whoop device, or what was his HRV after drinking 12 beers and eating 12 donuts last night. Like, people want to know the data, the science behind it, right? So it was really cool to be able to capture all of that and really showcase it in a more advanced, or more technologically sound approach to this type of transformation, which I think people really enjoyed, because now I can take all the stuff I learned from the first one and I have so much more access to different technologies and different platforms and different measuring devices to kind of show exactly what was happening, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally, and my personal life as well. So that's kind of why I did it again in 2020. And then that's kind of how it was structured. The only difference was I did 4 months of gaining weight in 2020 and 4 months of losing weight. The reason I switched that up was because from the TV show that we did, where we had 2 seasons on A&E, we did a 4-month and 4-month format, just because 6 months and 6 months is a long time to keep people engaged and keep people coming back. 8 months is a long time as well, but it's shorter than the 12 months, but still enough to gain a significant amount of weight.
That's so cool, man. This is great that you documented this. So yeah, so I guess let's I do want to know what the differences were in losing the weight the second time, and then I'd love to get into some of the psychology things there.
Yeah, so losing the weight the second time, obviously, by this time I was more into keto intermittent fasting, and that's kind of the approach that I took to lose the weight. My exercise was pretty similar, I would say. Like, yes, there were some advancements in, different movements or different types of structures of the exercises that I did to get the most bang for your buck. But for the most part, the nutrition aspect was a ketogenic approach. So high fat, moderate protein, low carb is what I did. And then I also implemented intermittent fasting on most of those days. I actually did some really cool experiments with not just keto, but I did some experiments with paleo, vegan, and vegetarian. Those diets, keto, paleo, vegan, and vegetarian, are very popular here in the US. And a lot of people are on like one of those 4 diets, for the most part. And so what I wanted to do was showcase the good and bad of each of those diets. So during the weight gain phase, I actually did a dirty experiment with keto, paleo, vegan, vegetarian to show people like, hey, I'm a big fan of keto, but it can be done in a very unhealthy way if you don't do it correctly. Same thing with vegan, same thing with vegetarian. Like, just because you are, eating one of these ways doesn't guarantee you're going to be healthy, doesn't guarantee you're going to lose weight. So I showed people all the pitfalls and mistakes that people make on these diets, and did it to gain the weight, to show people how unhealthy it can be if done incorrectly. And then on the flip side, when I lost the weight, I did the same experiment, but in a healthy, a healthier approach of, hey, if you're going to do one of these diets, here's how to do it the right way, the healthy way. And I did blood work before and after with my doctor to kind of show what was happening on the inside of my body, not just the outside of my body. But that was a really cool experiment that I did as well. But for the most part, other than that little 4-week window, I was mostly doing keto and intermittent fasting, pretty much every single day. So I'd fast 16 hours, eat, lunch. I would have keto coffee, which is, MCT oil with my coffee in the morning. And then I would have a lunch as my main meal and then dinner as my second meal of the day. And that's kind of how the structure that I followed to lose the weight. Got it.
Yeah, that's such a great insight too. Like people can do keto wrong, vegan wrong, even paleo, which I would say that I follow paleo pretty strictly as well. Yeah, that's really amazing. And is there, and by the way, people should check out Drew Manning if you Google him or find him on social. Lots of before and after pictures. Pretty incredible to see such drastic before and afters and in such a short period of time. So definitely check that out. And is this still documented, like your journey, if people want to go back and kind of go through some of these, see like what you did for the good version versus the bad version? Is that documented and available to view still?
Yeah, the easiest place to probably find that would be my YouTube channel, which is just Fit2Fat2Fit, and we'll put all that, I'm sure, in the show notes at the end of the podcast. But yeah, all that is still documented. It's still out there on social media. The easiest place to probably find it is YouTube.
Cool. And that's fit, and then the number 2 fat, and then the number 2 fit.com and on YouTube as well. Yeah, Fit2Fat2Fit. Yeah. Awesome. So okay, so you got blood work, and then you talked about moods and how, so let's talk a little bit about that, about your mood, about your blood work differences, psychological differences on the weight gain versus the weight loss. I'm so curious to hear what happened there.
Yeah, so this is kind of the part that I really wanted to highlight, because people already knew about the weight gain, the belly growing, the man boobs, the big, like the love handles, like that kind of part is expected. What I wanted to show people was the psychological aspect of how this food and lack of exercise affects me as a dad, as a boyfriend. I was married the first journey. I should probably point that out. I was married, got divorced in between, years later after Fit2Fat2Fit 1.0, and then was in a relationship for my second journey. So I had a girlfriend at the time for my 2.0 journey, and my girls were a lot older. So my daughters were 2 years old and a newborn, but on the first one, and then the second one, they were, I think, 9 and 11. So a lot older.
Same ages as my daughters, essentially.
Oh, nice. Cool. Yeah. So you can imagine, incorporating them a little bit older into this journey. So there's different family dynamics. And so here's the thing that I really wanted to show people, and this is why I wanted to do it again, was to show people like, hey, last night I had all this junk food. Here's my sleep, right? So I use my Whoop device to track my my sleep score and my HRV, and you would see how those would plummet and decline very rapidly. But then I would also show people like, look, just because you're eating unhealthy food and just because you're exercising doesn't, like, if the worst thing it did was just make you gain body fat, it actually wouldn't be that bad. But it affects your ability to show up as a human, with your personality, your mood, your energy levels. Your ability to handle stress is severely diminished when you're sleep deprived and your hormones are out of whack. And so you're eating these foods, you're not exercising, you're going about your day, you're working, you're doing all the things, you think you're the same version of yourself, but in reality, you're not. Because if you're not sleeping through the night, if you're a male and your testosterone is dropped significantly to 100 or 200 versus normally when it's above 600 or 800, you're not going to feel the same amount of motivation and desire to do, hard things. And then your ability to handle stress, whether it's from your spouse or your partner or your kids or your work, is severely diminished when your hormones are out of whack, your cortisol's through the roof all day long, and you're constantly, feeling overwhelmed and burned out. Your ability to show up as the best version of yourself is not there, is severely diminished. And I don't think people really connect those dots. And so I wanted to show people, look, like, I'm going through this as an experiment. Many of you are probably living this way, similar to this way, for years or decades. You don't know any different. This has kind of become the norm for you. So my hope was to wake people up, to show people like, look, this is how it's affecting me. And unfortunately, not to get too personal, but I ended up going through a breakup, not because of my journey, but during my journey, totally unexpected, did not life happens sometimes. And, here I was in the middle of my journey and ended up breaking up after a 2-year relationship with my girlfriend. And in the middle of all the gaining of the weight, just threw more chaos and more hardship into this journey that I had to, deal with. And, it really, really affected me on a deep emotional level to be able to show up my best self, whether it was for my daughters or whether it was for this experiment. I would say before the breakup, I was eating the food to gain the weight, and it did taste good. I'm not gonna lie. After the breakup, the food became kind of like my medicine, where when I was sad, lonely, or depressed, there's something about having a drink of alcohol, having a pint of Ben and Jerry's ice cream that temporarily makes you feel better, even just for a small moment. And it relieves that emotional pain that you're feeling from, the things of life that will affect you. And what it did for me was it helped me empathize with those that struggle with emotional eating on such a deeper level, even more than my first experiment, because what it did for me was show me the power of emotional eating and the power of the emotional connection to food that people have. And this is why I think so many people become emotional eaters and are stuck in this vicious cycle of eating our emotions. And I think what happens to most people is they try and change their body. They try and lose weight. They go on a physical transformation journey. They'll do a challenge. They'll do a diet. They'll focus on the physical aspect of it. But life doesn't life doesn't become easier for you just because you're trying to lose weight. You're still going to have the emotional pains of life, whether it's from relationships or divorce or bankruptcy, financial issues, relationship issues, work issues. The stress of life is still going to happen. And if you've been programmed for the past 20, 30, 40 years of when you have to deal with emotional stress, as a human, you most likely are going to look for an escape or something to numb the emotional pains of life or a distraction. And unfortunately, food is the most accessible drug that we have because it's legal, first of all, and we need food to survive. We have to eat food. And it's so convenient and cheap and affordable, and it tastes freaking good. And guess what? It gives us that little dopamine hit that our brains are wanting in those moments of emotional pain. And so for most people, they turn towards food in those moments of emotional pain. And then they start creating this vicious cycle because now what they'll do is they'll have a pint of ice cream or a glass of alcohol. And then from there, they're training their brain like, hey, anytime you feel uncomfortable, we always have this available, this drug available to make us feel better. And you can do that 3, 4, 5 times a day and not have to deal with the emotional pains of life. And then after, days or weeks or months of doing that consistently, you've gained some weight, you become very unhealthy. And then now you're trying to willpower your way out of that. That's the same as it is for a drug addict trying to just willpower their way getting off of a drug like cocaine or heroin. Mm-hmm. It's not that simple, not that easy. But unfortunately, food addiction is kind of swept under the rug because we say, well, it's not really, you just have to have willpower, you just have to have discipline and, believe that you can do it. And unfortunately, for most people, that doesn't work. But what this journey did for me was help me empathize on a deeper level, see the connections between why we eat our emotions and then how to overcome that is really, really hard. But it has a lot more to do with your mental and emotional state than your, ability to tap into like a David Goggins type of mentality to willpower your way out of this, which let's be honest, 90% of people just don't have that amount of willpower discipline to do that. And so this is why I'm such a big proponent of helping people empathize with them first and foremost, and then help them overcome those mental and emotional hurdles so that they can start to heal those parts of themselves that are hurting so that they don't always have to turn towards food or a drug of some type to feel better. They learn how to internalize that, release that emotional pain so that then the physical stuff, dieting, exercising, all the stuff they know they're supposed to do becomes more easy and more manageable for them as they deal with those mental and emotional hurdles or challenges or traumas. As they heal that, the physical stuff becomes easier to do consistently to then where they can actually see results in the long run. But this is why so many people struggle with the fitness industry, because the fitness industry tries to just say, hey, here's a supplement, here's a workout, here's a diet. If you just do this, it'll magically fix you. And people are looking for these outside sources of happiness to be like, oh, if I get this body, then all my problems will go away. Then I'll be happier in my life. And but unfortunately, it's not that simple. So that's kind of what I learned from this experiment, and how I help people now is completely different than how I helped people, before I even did this.
Wow. Wow. So
Yeah.
this is amazing. This is really fascinating to me. And so, okay, so just to kind of recap, so obviously your sleep got worse, your pretty much all your markers, your testosterone went way down once you started eating more processed foods, higher carb, higher sugar, standard American diet, which kind of just some things in there, right? Like, so many people want to go on testosterone therapy, but still eat processed foods and carbs and sugar. Right. And so you're not really addressing the core root of the problem. So there's obviously some learnings in there as well. I'm a true believer. I mean, I can feel the difference that's why I just don't drink anymore. Right. I actually wish, sometimes I wish I was more anti-fragile, because there's sometimes I go out on date night with my wife and I'd like to have a couple of drinks with her, but I just know how bad I feel like the next couple of days, and I just can't do it anymore as well. So so the way you feel after, your mood, your motivation and drive, if you're trying to, this is why I feel like for entrepreneurs or just people who are driven and want to do more and want to feel better, not just entrepreneurs, we want to be a better parent, like you said, want to be a better person, to have that, this is what peak performance, why we have this name, is like mental and physical energy, not just physical. It's a lot to do with mental. For me, in fact, it's probably more mental than physical, the benefits. So some great learnings there. But now let's get to the so that's a great learning, because so many people just look at weight loss, right? They're just like, oh, I just want to lose weight, right? It's like, do you know you're going to get so many more benefits there too, or so many less benefits if you're overweight, which I think over 50% of our country is overweight. So let's say someone is in this situation now, right? So you're working with clients now in this situation, they're overweight, they've been in these pattern cycles for 20 years, like you said. I know there's a lot to unpack, and we probably can't do it, in the 10 or 15 minutes that we have left here now. So, but what are some of the initial things or learnings or ways that you work with your clients now who are in that situation?
Yeah. So the way I work with people now is very unconventional. A lot of people don't talk about this approach in the fitness industry. It's more of a holistic approach, because really what it has to do with is, I learned this from this man named Dr. Gabor Mate, who was on the Tim Ferriss podcast one time. And he said, instead of asking why the addiction, right? So food addiction, porn addiction, alcoholism, drug addiction, whatever the addiction is, he says to ask why the pain. What is the pain behind the addiction that you're trying to escape from? And this is what I mean by escaping the emotional pains of life. As humans, we don't like discomfort. We don't like pain, whether it's physical pain or emotional pain. And so what we do, like I mentioned, is we look for ways to escape that pain, to numb that pain, to distract ourselves from having to deal with it. There's another quote by Rumi who says, the cure for pain is in the pain. And what that means is, instead of running away from this pain and wishing it away and wishing it would just not be there, it's time to face the pain and ask that pain what it's there to teach you. So some of this might have to do with childhood trauma. It might have to do with abuse. It might have to do with some severely damaging, psychologically damaging things that have happened to us in our past that we just are too afraid to face and too afraid to bring up again or talk about because it's uncomfortable. But until we do, that emotional pain will manifest itself most of the time in a physical form of addiction, whether it's food addiction or lack of self-worth or lack of confidence or lack of self-love. And that affects someone's ability to show up in a consistent way with a physical transformation, for example. And this is why so many people struggle with it. So the way I try and help people overcome this is truly by increasing their level of self-awareness, because Anthony DeMello says, what you are aware of, you're in control of, and what you're not aware of is in control of you. And this is such a profound quote for so many people, because so many people go throughout their day totally unaware of why they do what they do or why they are the way they are. Because if you've ever been in therapy, if you've ever done the work on yourself, the inner work, it helps you to connect the dots to help you realize, oh, this is why I am the way I am. This experience as a childhood or with my parents or with my siblings, this experience that happened caused me to react in a certain way. Maybe I felt some kind of pain, and maybe I turned towards food as a way of comfort, of self-soothing, of control, something that someone was in control of, versus these forms of abuse or traumas are out of your control, right? But what that does for them is as they become more self-aware, they then can realize, oh, this is why I do this one thing. It's because it stems from this. And once you're aware of that, then you can be more in control of it in the moment. So let's say one day you're, with your kids or you're with your spouse and you're triggered, right? You're emotionally triggered. Someone says something to you or does something to you that brings up some kind of discomfort, some kind of pain, and you're not really before aware of it in the past of like, oh, this causes me to feel unworthy or like a bad person, and therefore I'm going to take it out or lash it out on my family or my loved ones. But as you become more aware of it and you realize, oh, this stems from this thing, it has nothing to do with this person that's triggering me, it has everything to do with this emotional pain that I've experienced in the past. Now that you're aware of that, when that trigger happens, you can then become the observer of your thoughts rather than just reacting to your thoughts and attaching yourself to your thoughts. You can just observe your thoughts and not attach yourself emotionally to them, which you normally would do. And instead of reaching for the food or reaching for the alcohol or reaching for the drug, like you normally do, like you've programmed your brain, now you can be more in control of that thought process and say, okay, hold on a second, this is what's happening. I'm triggered. My initial response is to reach for the cake or the ice cream or the alcohol. And now that I'm doing the work and I'm becoming more aware of these things, now I can decide how I want this to play out. Now I can more thoughtfully respond and decide, okay, do I really want the cake? Am I reaching for this cake to escape? Am I reaching for this cake to numb the pain? And asking yourself those types of questions are really important because you need to be honest with yourself. And, instead of like, hey, I am having this cake because it's my daughter's birthday and I want to bond with my family. That's a whole different reason, right? If you're by yourself at home at night, you're struggling emotionally and you're eating a whole cake by yourself, probably not the healthiest thing to do, right? Because you're most likely numbing some type of emotional pain. But self-awareness helps you to be more in control of how you respond to emotional triggers. So how do I help people with self-awareness? Things like journaling, writing down gratitude list every single day, doing positive affirmations every single day, going to therapy. Meditation is a huge tool to help people become more self-aware, to become the observer of their thoughts and not attach themselves to their thoughts emotionally. And so these are methods that have nothing to do with weight loss, but have everything to do with someone's ability to be more in control of their body and their reactions to emotional triggers, which has everything to do with how someone's ability to transform in the fitness world. Their ability to stay consistent with is their ability to be in control of their decision-making process as they respond to triggers and things like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, to me, it makes a lot of sense because actually it's been one of the biggest things I've been working on for the past couple of years is actually being less reactive.
Yeah.
Kind of side note, I've been studying Kabbalah recently, and it's actually been extremely helpful for me. And the main theme around it is not being reactive, right? When you get triggered, can you overcome this reactive tendency and the whole premise is like if you actually pause and reframe it and don't let it trigger you and can actually train yourself to not be reactive, you actually show in Kabbalah, which is a little more, kind of mysticism kind of a thing. It's like when you show the universe that you can overcome this challenge without being reactive, then you actually create a bigger vessel to receive more or to do more or whatever. But it's clear you've done a lot of work, personal development, spirituality, work on yourself to get to this place. And so, yeah, that's just really powerful that you have those insights for people, and that you've seen that on a firsthand basis, working with so many clients over the years. Do you think ever in some cases, I'm sure in some cases, obviously in some cases there's trauma and there's things like that. Do you think in some cases it's just that they were brought up in a household that just ate horribly from, and gave their kids soda from a young age, and they just got addicted to sugar and carbs and processed foods from such a young age, and then they just carried that addiction throughout their entire life? Do you ever see kind of things just like that at all?
Oh, absolutely. I think most of us become products of our environment, and if you grew up in a household where you were given sweets or sugars or candies as even a form of love, right? Food can be given as a form of love in
Right.
certain cultures, and that's really hard to overcome. And that's really hard to break that habit of like, oh, my mom is making me my favorite cookies because I had a sad day or I had a hard day or whatever the reason is. If someone has grown up in that environment, I think if you have one parent that's obese, you have a 50% chance of becoming obese. If you have two parents that are obese, you have an 80% chance of becoming obese. So
Mhm.
learned patterns are something that plays a huge factor, whether it's physical patterns like eating certain foods or emotional patterns of self-abuse or self-hate or lack of self-worth. Of course, like we as humans are the ultimate adaptation machines. And so if we grew up in an environment where that was the environment that we grew up in, that's all we've ever known, it's going to be really, really hard to break that or unlearn that patterning as we grow older, unless we become, like I said, more self-aware of like, okay, why am I the way I am? Why do I do what I do? And unless you do the work and really figure that out, it's going to be really, really hard for you to unlearn your way out of that, if that makes any sense. If you're just trying to willpower your way out of it, it's really, really difficult until you do the work. So that's why I'm a huge proponent of doing the inner work, not working in, not just working out to
Mm.
transform.
I love that. Working in, not just working out. I like that. Yeah, and that's especially true, I think, for those like if you know what to do, which I think, right, like it's not hard to learn what to do, right? And there's so many ways. You even said it. You lost 75 pounds eating 5, 6 meals a day, and you lost, whatever it was,
Yeah.
60 to 75 pounds eating 2 meals a day doing keto, right? So it's more about like if you know what to do, why aren't you doing it? And going deeper into that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
that's so powerful, man. Um, so where can people so let's say someone who's in this situation or just in general, I'm gonna follow you. I think everyone else
Yeah.
should as well. Where can people learn more from you and follow you?
Yeah, so all my social media channels are the same. My website, my podcast, my book is all fit number two, fat number two, fit on all social media handles. And that's my website, fit2fat2fit.com. My podcast is Fit2Fat2Fit Experience. And my first book, which is a New York Times bestseller, which is also called Fit2Fat2Fit, is all available online. And nowadays it's super easy to find. So
Awesome. I highly recommend people follow you, learn from you, reach out to you if they want to if they need more in-depth kind of help, because it seems like you really, it's amazing to see trainers that someone like you who's not just working on the outer game, but also the inner game, which I just know how important this is. So any other, just before we go, I'd love to know any other books or maybe a seminar or experience or something for someone who, let's say, hasn't really done a lot of inner work or
yeah.
self-awareness work. Any off the top recommendations other than kind of learning more from you?
Yeah, man, okay. There's a few books I'll mention. One is called The Four Agreements by
Yeah.
Don Miguel Ruiz. Highly recommend that to almost any human. The Mastery of Self is another good book by him. The Fifth Agreement is another book that he put out there for one more. So there's 5 total agreements that he's put out there. Let's see what else. There's another one by my friend Shalina Ayana called Becoming the One. And that's
Mm,
about learning how to show up for yourself and become the hero of your own story and why that's so important. I think all relationships in your life stem from your relationship with yourself. So if you have a poor relationship with yourself, you're most likely going to have other poor relationships in your life. I think everything's a direct reflection of how we see ourselves. And so
mm,
as you improve your relationship with yourself, all your other relationships can improve as well, especially your relationship with your body. So you are not your body. That's one thing I would also say is that your body is not your identity. There's more to you than just your physical body, because your physical body, I mean, that can change. It can change in an instant, in a car accident, your body could, be totally transformed in the blink of an eye. So if you're basing your identity around your body, you're probably doing yourself a disservice, because there's more to you than just your physical body. I've been overweight twice now, obese twice now, and I've been fit, I've been skinny, I've been all kinds of different, shapes and sizes. So my body is not who I am. It's just a part of me. And I think that's an also important part when it comes to transformation as well, is realizing that there's more to you than your body. And I think it comes down to like what we talked about a little bit before about identity. Who are you besides just your physical body that people see?
Yeah. I recently heard something about like it was some research or study that they did around like literally people who even became paralyzed, right? And eventually their happiness level went back to their whatever their whatever the thermostat is set at, essentially, right? So you have a certain level of happiness, and some people even got paralyzed, and they didn't, their life wasn't over, there wasn't this, they actually defaulted back eventually, right? After, once the initial trauma was over, they defaulted back to their level. And same thing with people who maybe are at a certain level, think that achieving some sort of success is going to get them to a higher level. They achieved the success, but they didn't do any internal work, inner work, and they defaulted back to where they were feeling emotionally and mentally as well. So
yeah, good point.
Drew, this has been really, really powerful. We haven't had too many people talk about both the inner work and outer work at the same time. I want to really commend you on how self-aware you are, how much work I can tell just from this conversation you've done on yourself, and how you're now inspiring others to do the same. So really appreciate you taking the time here today, and encourage everyone to follow you, Fit2Fat2Fit. Really amazing work that you're doing in the world. Thank you.
So Laura, thank you. It was a pleasure talking with you, man. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening. And just a reminder, if you haven't yet tried any of our Peak Performance products, you get 20% off your first order. We have one of the largest selection of USDA certified organic superfood powders, as well as very high quality supplements. And you get 20% off your first order at buypeakperformance.com. That's www.buypeakperformance.com.